Good afternoon once again, everyone. I'm very, very thankful that you all could join me. Tonight, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and I'm going to try to cover the next three chapters in this one session because it's dealing with the tabernacle. I'm basically going to give an overview of what it says, and then we'll come into the priestly garments and all of these others coming later. And I've decided to take this method with even like the book of Leviticus and Psalms and all of these other books. In order, for the sake of time, I believe that it would be more beneficial to just give really concise overviews as much as possible instead of going verbatim on all of them, because I believe that an overview, it would be more beneficial for us. Anyway, we left off last time in Exodus 24 where Moses was coming up Mount Sinai and all the rest were having to remain down, and God's giving him instructions on how he wants the tabernacle to be constructed, his priests to be dressed. He's giving him instructions on how to. He's already talked about the judicial system that he wishes the people to follow. Now it's the worship system. And we pick up in Exodus 25. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they may bring me an offering of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart. Ye shall take my offering. God always desires a willing offering. A willing offering. This is God telling, and all of these offerings were going to be that of what would be used to build the tabernacle itself. And the estimation of the tabernacle's worth in today's money, in my research, was $13 million. And it weighed about 19,000 pounds. It's kind of astonishing whenever you look at all these big mansions around the world, and this little tent was constructed with so much gold and silver and wasn't very big. So it says an awful lot about what God's desiring. God could have made this tabernacle in a moment, but we should feel honored that we are even allowed to participate in doing these great things. So he's not only constructing a tabernacle, but he's also working on the hearts of the people. You see, I always say that God is like an infinite chess player. You know, he's the best of chess players. He does multiple things in just what we perceive as one instance. Anyway, and this is the offering which ye shall take of them: gold and silver and brass, and blue and purple and scarlet and fine linen and goat's hair, and ram skins dyed red, and badger skins and shittim wood, oil for the light, spices for anointing oil and for sweet incense, onyx stones and stones to be set in the ephod and in the breastplate, talking about of the priest. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. Very, very lovely. Okay, now let's get into the subject at hand. I wanted to use those first few verses to see what the materials were going to be. Notice right here, God says that I may dwell among them. The tabernacle was a holy place where it would be set right in the middle of all the other tribes, and we'll come to that later on. But all the other tribes would be surrounding, but God would be right there in the midst. And this was like a very, very glorified tent, basically. He says that I may dwell among them. This was meant to show that God was dwelling in the wilderness with his people. And the Word, God, was made flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, speaking of Jesus, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Okay, now let's focus right here on this word dwelt. So it says that God in the tabernacle dwelt among his people through the tabernacle. This is an actual screenshot from my Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. Just to let you all know, I got this right out of the book. And the word used in John 1:14 is skenao, meaning to tent or encamp. to occupy, to reside, as God did in the tabernacle of old, a symbol of protection and communion. Now, this is the word used in John 1 in the New Testament. This is not the word used back in the Old Testament that we're studying right now. And even in this very definition, it says, as God did in the tabernacle of old, a symbol of protection and communion. It's quite fascinating. So there's a connection between the tabernacle and Jesus. Right off the bat, we can see this. Hebrews 8:5 says, who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern shown to thee in the mount. So this tabernacle is completely blueprinted by God. This has nothing to do with Moses. He's just telling Moses, design it in the exact way that I'm telling you to, because it's showing heavenly things that Moses has never seen. Only God knows what they look like, and the angels and such. But he says this tabernacle is to represent something far greater. The very first item that God tells Moses to build is the Ark of the Covenant, of course. And the Ark was never meant to be touched. As you'll see, these poles right here, wooden poles overladen with gold. Everything about this thing was golden. Now, there were 3 items inside of the Ark of the Covenant. One was the 10 Commandments. The other was Aaron's rod that budded. We'll come to that. And then the golden pot of manna that was saved. The lid of the Ark was called the mercy seat. And it had sculpted cherubim on it. These are heavenly angels that surround the throne of God in heaven. In Leviticus 16, we'll read this. And he shall, talking about the priest, the high priest, and he shall take of the blood of the bullock and sprinkle it with his finger upon the mercy seat eastward, and before the mercy seat shall he sprinkle the blood with his finger 7 times. So they would sacrifice a bullock, and he could only do this once a year. It's on the Day of Atonement, a Yom Kippur, whatever you wish to ask, but this was inside of the Holy of Holies. If you'll look right here, the Holy of Holies was just a very small room. It was the most important of all the rooms. And it was located in the very, very back of the tabernacle itself. Right here was called the Holy Place. Right here's the Holy of Holies. So the high priest, once a year, they would sacrifice a bull, and he would take the blood of this bull, this sacrifice, and he would 7 times sprinkle on the mercy seat. Then shall he kill the goat of the sin offering that is for the people, and bring his blood within the veil, and do with that blood as he did with the blood of the bullock, and sprinkle it upon the mercy seat and before that. So he would do the same thing with the goat, the sin offering. The very same thing that he did with the bull, he would do with the goat as well. 7 times from the goat's blood. The very next thing Moses is ordered to construct is the table of showbread. As you all can hopefully see right here, the table of showbread was located right across from the menorah in the holy place. So that was the second thing that he's told to be built. There were 12 loaves of showbread upon this table, and they were always having to be there because they represented the 12 tribes of Israel. This also had the wooden poles, and under it, these things are holy. They're not supposed to be touched. Later on, we learn of a man named Uzzah, who he tries to keep the Ark of the Covenant from falling over. He touches it and he dies because of it. You're not allowed to touch these things. So these poles were always there. But anyway, once a week, the 12 showbreads upon the table of showbread would be replaced, and only the priests were allowed to eat the old bread. We're also told about these crowns that are placed up to keep things from falling over. And there are double rows of crowns. Now, of course, this is another showing of Christ. And it's just like the mercy seat. That's a showing of Christ. and how the blood has to be sprinkled upon there, and that type. This is all showing Christ. Just keep that in mind the entire study. But double crown around the border. The king with many crowns, Christ is called. Two offices, one is priest and the other is king. Okay, so Jesus the king priest after the order of Melchizedek. So right here is double crown, showing prevented things from falling. The hand of Christ that keeps us from falling. It's all this is symbolic, and and as we just read, how the Old Testament things were a shadow of things that would be revealed in Christ. Then, right across from it, the menorah was ordered to be made. Each branch of the menorah was ordered to be crafted after almond blossoms. The almond tree, this particular one, was the first to bloom during the springtime, representing, we believe, the first sign of new life and freshness and clarity. So God, all of this has symbolism, great heavenly symbolism, far beyond us. But what we can gather, I'm going to try to mention. It was also made out of 1 talent of pure gold. There was no wood involved in it. This was pure gold, every bit of it, in 1 talent. So anywhere from 72 to 75 pounds. The estimation of this alone would have been, in today's money, about $1.5 million. This would be the only light within the tabernacle, and it was to burn all the time. And if you'll notice, it has 7 lights upon it. In the book of Revelation, we'll read of the 7 spirits of God representing the Holy Ghost. And so this is the light of the world. All else is darkness. Only God is light. Without him, there is only darkness. Next up is of the coverings of the tabernacle, what was supposed to cover it. And this is quite fascinating. All of this is very fascinating, but whenever I came to these very significant right here. If you'll notice how God is working from the inside out, he begins with the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holy Places, the most holy place. Then he starts to move the table of showbread and the menorah. He's working his way outward, okay? And we'll see with these coverings how the further out they get, the less attractive and appealing and expensive they become. The less beautiful they are, the less glorious they are, because the further away you get from God, which the Ark of the Covenant was to represent him, the further they get away from that, the less glorious things begin to become. The very first covering was the inside covering, and this could not ever be seen by anyone, because on the inside of the tabernacle it was gold. But right here, you'll see that these cherubim would be drawn upon this thing. All over this very first inside covering, this fine twined linen would be cherubim all over it, like the glory of God. And then right after it, we have goat's hair, literal hair from goats intertwined, okay? This hair, this goat hair covering, completely covered this magnificently beautiful cherub laden covering. It completely covered it. Could not see it for the goat's hair. Now this signified how heaven and glorious things are invisible to us. They're there, but because of our flesh, we can't see them. Our flesh is blocking us from seeing these great and outstanding things, because the goat was always seen as a picture of sin and the flesh and the world. And so this is representing us and our flesh covering up the glorious. Then we come to the last two, which is the ram skin dyed red and the badger skin. The ram is a full-grown sheep. It's a full-grown male sheep, usually the leader of the pack. And this red it had to be dyed red, actually. And of course, it represents Christ and his atoning blood, his atoning sacrifice, and how it's covering our flesh. It covers up we believe that it covered up the goat's hair. And then, right outside of it, we had the badger skin. And the badger skin was the least attractive of all of them. Very, very unappealing. And it was perfect, though, for keeping rain out, the weather. But if a foreigner was passing by, then they would say, that's what you're covering up the the tabernacle of your God with. Well, there's significance to it now. We read of Jesus in Isaiah 53:2. It's describing what he would look like. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. So we're told right here how Jesus wasn't an attractive fella. It wasn't like these pictures and portraits. He wasn't a Brad Pitt walking around, or a David, or a Saul, or a Joshua, a Joseph. He wasn't like this. He was a person in whom he didn't have any fine robes on. Now he's got the best robes. I'd say he's the best looking person ever now. I mean, but whenever he was down here, he wasn't attractive, much like this badger skin covering over the atoning sacrifice and the flesh, the goat's hair, and then you see the beauty underneath. All that's underneath it is telling a story, but on top you have something that's not attractive at all, not appealing. The world itself would not be taken aback by it. The world itself, it would not please. But we know him, so we know there's very much depth there. Then we come to the building of the tabernacle walls itself, not the walls of the outer court, but the walls of the tabernacle.
The framework of the tabernacle will consist of frames made of acacia wood. Each frame must be 15 feet high and 2¼ feet wide. There will be 2 pegs on each frame so they can be joined to the next frame. All the frames must be made this way. 20 of these frames will support the south side of the tabernacle. They will fit into 40 silver bases, 2 bases under each frame. On the north side there will also be 20 of these frames, with their 40 silver bases, 2 bases for each frame. On the west side there will be 6 frames, along with an extra frame at each corner. These corner frames will be connected at the bottom and firmly attached at the top with a single ring forming a single unit. Both of these corner frames will be made the same way. So there will be 8 frames on that end of the tabernacle, supported by 16 silver bases, 2 bases under each frame. Make crossbars of acacia wood to run across the frames, 5 crossbars for the north side of the tabernacle, and 5 for the south side. Also make 5 crossbars for the rear of the tabernacle, which will face westward. The middle crossbar, halfway up the frames, will run all the way from one end of the tabernacle to the other. Overlay the frames with gold and make gold rings to support the crossbars. Overlay the crossbars with gold as well. Set up this tabernacle according to the design you were shown on the mountain.
Certain researchers believe that the silver foundation is representative of how Judas Iscariot received silver for turning Christ over to the Sanhedrin, which led to his death, burial, and resurrection, which is the gospel, and which is how we get saved. It preaches good. I don't know if that's the reasoning behind it, but it sounds like it has some weight to it. Next up is the veil separating the Holy of Holies from the holy place. Once again, only the high priest, once a year, one man, one time a year, was allowed to go beyond that veil. Whenever Jesus was crucified, just like his body was torn for us, so was the veil torn down. So was the veil torn, and now there is no barrier separating us from God. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he hath consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh. Then the door to enter into the tabernacle was ordered to be made.
Across the inside of the tabernacle hang a special curtain made of fine linen with cherubim skillfully embroidered into the cloth, using blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. Hang this inner curtain on gold hooks set into 4 posts made from acacia wood and overlaid with gold. The posts will fit into the silver bases. When the inner curtain is in place, put the Ark of the Covenant behind it. This curtain will separate the holy place from the most holy place. Then put the Ark's cover, the place of atonement, on top of the Ark of the Covenant, inside the most holy place. Place the table and lampstand across the room from each other outside the inner curtain. The lampstand must be placed on the south side, and the table must be set toward the north. Make another curtain from fine linen for the entrance of the sacred tent, and embroider exquisite designs into it, using blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. Hang this curtain on gold hooks set into 5 posts made from acacia wood and overlaid with gold. The post will fit into 5 bronze bases.
Like the veil that we just mentioned, as well as the gate to the outer court, they are all made with the same blue, purple, scarlet yarn and finely twisted linen. Now all of these colors are symbolic. Blue is the color of the sky, which we call the first heaven. I believe there's going to be a lot of blue in heaven. I believe God gives us the blue sky because that's a lot of heaven looks like that, the third heaven. But so it represents the heavenly. The blue coloring represents the heavenly. The purple is of royalty, and the scarlet, of course, is of the blood atoning work of Christ. All of this is of Christ, how he is heavenly, how he is royalty, and how he's the sacrifice he's the great mediator between us and God. It's all about Jesus. I can't say that enough. It's truly all about Jesus. It's amazing just how important that this one man truly is. It's beyond comprehension. There was also 5 posts at the doorway into the tabernacle. These were overlaid with gold, and researchers believe these symbolize the justified saints made perfect, hence the gold. Even though we remain in the flesh. Remember how in on the doors in the new heaven, it said written the 12 tribes of Israel, 12 doors, each with a tribe written upon it. So, as I believe there's great significance in these posts. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4:7, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. So, even in this flesh, there's a treasure. Next was the altar, right here to be built. Now, this would be the only place that Israel, from the time of its construction until Solomon's temple was built, this would be the only place that they were permitted to make sacrifices. The only place, and it was located in the outer court. That's the reason why you see later on how there's a lot of disputes about how people would make sacrifices on the high hills and just a variety of other places that they would just try to make their own sacrifices. This was the only place permitted. Now, if you'll notice with the altar, there were horns on it, and the blood of the sacrifice would have to be smeared on those horns. There were also other uses for these horns. They believed that they could tie the sacrifice around and maybe hold it down with the horns and such. It was also to show the strength of, we believe, Christ and his sacrifice made. It's also to show the strength of Christ. Now, this particular altar would be made of wood. Whenever Korah and his followers later on in the wilderness We'll read about them shortly. But whenever they rebel against Moses, the earth opens up and swallows them all up. Now, God commands afterwards that all of the bronze censers held by Korah and his followers, that they be hammered into this altar. It was very smooth and very shiny and very eloquent, but all of a sudden now it's going to have these rough spots all over it, a constant reminder of what happens to rebels. And every time that a sacrifice was made, the beaten up parts would show exactly this is a remembrance of Korah and what they did. Okay, so don't rebel. Next up were the altar's accessories ordered to be made, which was the pans, basins, forks, and fire pans. We'll come to their uses maybe later on, but for the sake of time. Next is the construction of the outer court itself.
And thou shalt make the court of the tabernacle. For the south side southward there shall be hangings for the court of fine twined linen of 100 cubits long for one side, and the 20 pillars thereof, and their 20 sockets shall be of brass. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets shall be of silver. And likewise for the north side in length there shall be hangings of 100 cubits long, and his 20 pillars and their 20 sockets of brass, the hooks of the pillars and their fillets of silver. And for the breadth of the court on the west side shall be hangings of 50 cubits, their pillars 10, and their sockets 10. And the breadth of the court on the east side eastward shall be 50 cubits. The hangings of one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And on the other side shall be hangings 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And for the gate of the court shall be an hanging of 20 cubits, of blue, and purple, and scarlet, and fine twined linen, wrought with needlework. And their pillars shall be 4, and their sockets 4. All the pillars round about the court shall be filleted with silver. Their hooks shall be of silver, and their sockets of brass. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 everywhere, and the height 5 cubits of fine twined linen, and their sockets of brass.
Now, this enclosure had several uses to it. First of all, it would keep the world out. It would keep the animals out. A lot of the weather, a lot of the dirt, a lot of the dust would be kept out. It was also to be a pretty good sized place. Right up here, you will see this is an American football field. And this is the size of the court of the tabernacle. So you see that there's plenty of room to walk around. All right, just notice lots and lots of room to walk around, prepare the sacrifice, get clean. It's, I believe, symbolic of God giving a lot of room for us to prepare ourselves. He's given a lot of room to, before we come into his presence, it shows the leniency in which God has for us. This is also what David and other psalmists meant whenever they said, "Blessed is the man whom thou choosest," talking about God, "and causest to approach unto thee, that he may dwell in thy courts. We shall be satisfied with the goodness of thy house, even of thy holy temple." Okay, so even whenever the temple was made, which would come later, but even once that the temple was made, then there was still this outer court. We'll come to all that later on, but he's talking about every time that you see, "May I dwell in thy courts," it's talking about this outer court, The gate of the outer court was then ordered to be constructed. Now, this gate would be located on the east side of the tabernacle. And we always hear, "Keep your eyes to the eastern sky because the sun rises in the east." Well, we believe that Christ's coming is going to be that glorious. It's going to have the brightness of the sun. So I think it's a pretty legit saying. But it's located on the east side. Maybe there's some significance there. I don't know. But it's also adorned with blue, purple, scarlet yarn, and fine linen thread, like the door and the veil. About 30 feet wide or so. And remember how Jesus says about how he is the door. He's speaking of himself. He says, if anybody enters in through any other way, they're a liar and a thief, and they're not of God. You have to come in through this way. And I believe that the width of it being so wide, 30 feet, that's quite a pretty good size opening there. But I believe that that shows the simplicity of Christ and how he wants everyone to come in. He's in the simplicity of the gospel and how he doesn't make it difficult for people. That's what I gather from it. And to end in Exodus 27, it's the mention of the oil to be used in the lampstand, the menorah, and it's olive. The olives are to be pressed and brand down. The oil is supposed to then be applied. Now, there are other aspects of the temple that we need to get to, but they'll show up in just a few chapters. But we covered 3 chapters today, and hope that you learned something. I'll, Lord willing, see you tomorrow. God, peace be with you. Amen.